It just got weird, didn't it? Where's the intro music? Where's the introduction to this podcast? You know what? Today, things are going to be a little different. They're going to be a little bit quieter and a little bit more personal here at Create If Writing. This is the podcast for writers and creatives dealing with the passion and the practice behind making good art. Or is it? I am your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and today we are talking about this podcast and podcasting in general and community and you. So the impetus behind this really weird podcast, which I have to say feels very awkward to me, but I'm going with it, okay? I just got back from Podcast Movement in Fort Worth, and so I'm a conference junkie. I'm sure you've heard me mention this before on the podcast, but I think I've been to 7, I don't know, a lot of conferences this year. It's 2015. I've been to a lot of conferences, some blogging conferences, a couple writing conferences, and then this was, a podcast conference. By far, this is the best conference I've been to. And there are a couple reasons for this. First of all, I have to give props for everything running smoothly. You cannot avoid hiccups when you have a conference, but I did not see any hiccups. It was run so smoothly, and it was a really big conference. Well, I say really big. It's the biggest conference I've probably been to. I am an introvert who loves smaller conferences. I feel like it's a little bit easier to connect. And bigger conferences, they make me want to pee my pants. They don't really. I don't want to pee my pants. They make me scared. I don't want to go to them. Did I just say I want to pee my pants on the podcast? Oh, it is personal. Let's see if we're going to edit this out. I'll decide later. But in any case, it was large, but it ran smoothly. Things started when they said they were going to start. Sessions were in the rooms they said they were going to be in. The sound, everything worked. They had coffee all day long. And you know what? I know how expensive that is from talking to other conference people. It's expensive, and they usually take it away after 10 a.m. And then people like me who drink coffee literally all day long are very, very sad. So I double fisted on the coffee for like most of the conference. If you're listening and you were at Podcast Movement, I was the girl with 2 cups of coffee all day. So that's one thing. It went really smoothly. That's great. I always got to give props. But that's not enough to make a conference great. I mean, that's just like the bare minimum that you hope for, right? That things start on time and go pretty well. You can forgive like accidents, but I hate when you smell like that disorganization. It makes me nuts. Okay, the other thing that was amazing, the speakers and the information, so incredibly valuable. I mean, I just learned so much. I have a notebook full of notes. I have links to presentations. I walked away just feeling like I got this. I have so many more ideas. And really this whole podcast episode is kind of something that came out of the whole conference. And I just really wanted to take some time to reflect about who I am, talk about who you are, and really just talk about the podcast itself. I'm trying to think the most valuable sessions. Really everything was valuable. I really needed some help with sound. And so, if you go back and listen to some of the first episodes of this podcast, there are just some issues. And I thought I was doing really well at learning to edit sound in 2 weeks when I launched this podcast, start to finish in 2 weeks. And I mean, I was a little bit right. Like I figured some stuff out and I was really wrong too. So I'm learning about sound, and I went to 2 sessions that were just so amazing. So that made it feel really accessible. I also just went to some sessions on community, which kind of brings me to the third thing that was so great, which was connection. I mean, I feel like there was such a connection between people. Like every session I went to, I talked to somebody I sat down with. And, I say that I'm an introvert, and I am, but I'm very social. Like you might not guess that. I think people still think of introverts as really, really quiet, shy people, which I'm not. However, at the end of the day, I can talk to people, but I go kind of crawl in a hole and I can't handle life anymore. The connections I made with other conference attendees was amazing, and especially a big shout out to Taylor Bradford of Pink Heels, Pink Truck, who just launched her podcast, Boss Girl Creative. And she and I know each other from Texas Women Bloggers, which is a group she runs on Facebook. And, we hadn't ever met in real life, but I heard she was going. And so she and I met up and we texted each other about like where we were and sessions we went to, and we ate some meals together and met other people together and did stuff apart too. So we weren't just like tied at the hip and all that. But it was really great to talk to a fellow podcaster and a fellow woman from Texas podcasting, especially somebody that was just starting out. So I actually am doing like a mini interview with her for the Blogger to Business podcast, and I'll leave the link to that in the show notes. But there was just this real sense of excitement that was shared. Like I think podcasting is not new, and I'm sure people who've been podcasting for a long time are just like, ugh, whenever people talk about it being the next big thing. But there have been some major shifts in podcasting in the last couple of years, one of which being Serial. And Sarah Koenig actually gave the ending keynote, which was incredible. It was like watching and experiencing an episode of Serial live. It was fantastic. So honestly, that was what prompted me to buy the ticket. I knew I wanted to go, but I was like, I don't know, it's expensive and I've been to 8 conferences this year. Should I go? And then I looked at the keynote. I'm like, Sarah Koenig? Yep, we're going. So anyway, there was a great connection with attendees, but this kind of brings me to the 4th point, which is connection, but also there was this sense of passion. There was a sense of drive that came from the speakers that had to do with connection. So let me give a couple examples. Cliff Ravenscraft, who I'm a big fan of, he is the podcast Answer Man and has a couple different podcasts. I actually got to meet him at a meetup before the conference started, which was great. And he took the time to meet people and shake their hands and ask about their podcasts and take their business cards and just be so personable, even though like he's huge in the podcasting world. But he got up and talked about deepening the connection you have with your community. And that, I think in that session and then another one, I really started thinking about doing this episode the way I'm doing it, which is like off the cuff. I don't have things written down. I'm just here talking to you. And the reason I wanted to do that stripped down version of the podcast, is kind of because of some of the things he talked about. He talked about realizing the importance of actually connecting with your fans. And he mentioned a few stories, one of which being a girl who I think started listening to his podcast and she was struggling with anorexia. And after talking to Cliff and kind of listening for a long time, she decided to start her own podcast to support younger girls who were struggling with anorexia and needed some support. And he went to, I'm not sure if it was a conference or something in New York City, and said that he knew she was going to be there. And he was walking down the street and he saw this giant group of girls. And at the front of them was this girl who had listened to his podcast and been inspired to start her own to support girls who were struggling with anorexia. And the group around her was a giant group of girls who were like her big fans, who had been struggling with anorexia, who needed support and found it by way of her podcast. So that's just such a unique and crazy way that his podcast affected her life, which then in turn resulted in a podcast, which then impacted so many other people's lives. Pat Flynn of Smart Passive Income had a similar story about how a guy who had broken both ankles, shattered them really, and kind of destroyed them. I think he was in Norway, but while he was recovering and in the hospital, he listened to the Smart Passive Income podcast and he decided he wanted to run a marathon. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to run a marathon and my ankles are just fine, thank you. But this guy with his shattered ankles and the braces and the pins, and he actually has permanent like metal brace type things like on the outside of his skin, which is how bad the breaks were that he had. He ran a marathon, and when he crossed the finish line, he held up a big sign that said something in a foreign language I can't understand, but you could see Pat Flynn's name at the end of it, but translated it was like, thank you to a few other people, and then Pat Flynn because of Pat's podcast. And Pat didn't even know about this until after the marathon had ended and the guy sent him an email. And then that guy became huge in the blogging world over there. And then other people started running marathons and holding up signs thanking that guy. So it was like this infectious thing that happened. And the point being, a lot of people got up and talked about how you don't know the impact your words will have and how podcasting, it's right in your ear. There's something about the connection that happens that's incredibly amazing. So I came away feeling like I really want to go deeper and I really want to be more connected to my fans. And that made me think of a couple things. It made me realize I want to kind of narrow my focus a little bit about who I'm talking to here. And so I may be sending out some surveys to those of you guys who are subscribed to my email or in the Facebook group. So please subscribe to the email and also join our Facebook group. But one thing that I learned about was the idea of having a voicemail set up so that your fans can call in. And I set one of those up this week. I'll give you the number and then I'm going to play some calls from my listeners. If you ever want to call at any time, this is free unless it's international, and then it probably has international charges because that's how life works. But the number is 929-31-IF-POD. One more time, it's 929-314-3763. So you can call and leave a voicemail and I can actually hear from you, which is really cool and makes me feel even more connected. And I will be asking periodic questions in the Facebook group or in the podcast. And if you call and want to give an answer, you can just give an answer privately and say, don't play this on the air. But if you don't say that, I'm going to feel free to use and edit your clip how it works best in the show. Anyway, I'm just super excited. And I got a bunch of voicemails this week. And so now I want to move into hearing some of those. So here's what I asked of you guys, because what I started thinking about when I was at podcast movement and thinking about this audience and thinking about myself and the kind of people I feel like I'm talking to, I sort of thought of like people who are burned out, people who are worn out, people who are, down and out as far as their writing and their creativity goes. Because I know so many people who have talked to me and talk about feeling burdened, feeling too busy, feeling like, they've been trying to publish a book forever, or they've been trying to grow their blog forever, or trying to build these different things. And they feel like they're set back by kids, by time, by money, by, just the way life is sometimes in publishing agencies and all these things. It just seems like there's all these hurdles. So the question I asked this week for people to answer is, if you ever had any of those hurdles, what got you to push through to get to the other side? So here are some words from you guys on that.
Cheval at Chev80. I would say for me, what inspires me the most to take action was the fact that, meeting so many amazing podcasters, the podcasting movement was really amazing. I would say at the same time, having that belief in yourself that you can make the world a better place.
Hey, Kirsten, it's Misty Newsom with worthyofourcalling.com. I just wanted to share what inspires me to move past the hurdle. And a lot of times it's seeing other bloggers or people in the sphere of influence that I'm looking to have a part of gain momentum and have they're inspirational to me. If they can do it, maybe I could do a little piece of what they can do. My Twitter handle is @worthycalling.
Hi, Kiki. This is Anita from blessedbutstressed.com. It takes me a really long time to move past a hurdle, kind of like a turtle. And the thing that inspires me is listening to hours and hours of podcasts and online classes and reading a lot of books until I finally feel sort of equipped to do things. Or sometimes I'm like a rabbit and I just jump into something having no idea what I'm doing. Kind of two different things. I'll get instantly inspired to try something. For example, start a Twitter account. And I kind of started a blog on a whim.
Hey, Kirsten, this is Liz at Liz Vonnie on Twitter. I've recently been on a wandering trip. Wandering in the sense that, you leave your job, you quit, and you don't have money coming in, and you just kind of move. You move forward, I think, in your brain, but also physically. My husband and I have been moving place to place. Along the way, I've been really inspired to shift my writing, and I think shift it in a way, that presses me outside of who I have allowed myself to be. I think I always really push to be myself, but sometimes the labels that we have or the places that we work or the people that we spend time with, no matter how hard we fight against it, we get boxed in. So not having a job and being in this wandering state, I don't feel boxed in anymore. I think too many times we think life has to be a certain way, and we surround ourselves with people, their lives look like our lives.
Hey, this is Jenna from gleefulgourmand.com, and one of my biggest hurdles or stumbling blocks in my ambition to pursue my dreams is actually myself. I've often joked that I would get so much more accomplished if I could just remove myself from the equation, literally move myself out of the way. I've been a stumbling block to my own passions and ambitions for a host of reasons, but the thing that's really helped me to overcome that is giving myself the grace to take a break, to put my dreams and the things I should be doing to achieve those things on hold for a bit and take a breather. I know we're all about continuous forward momentum in our society, but hitting the pause button has done wonders for me in that it allows me to reevaluate what I want and how I'm going to achieve it.
I loved getting those messages from you guys. So thanks so much for leaving them. And please, if you've called already or if you haven't called, call again, call for the first time. I really would love to hear from you. It's so valuable for me in terms of feedback, but it's really fun to put these clips on the show, despite the audio quality. So we'll see what we can do about that in the future. But I wanted to touch on a few of the things that people said when they called in and some of the common threads that I see. So Cheval talked about going to Podcast Movement, and he is a fellow Houstonian. Hey, Cheval. We had met before at the Houston Social Media Breakfast and connected again at Podcast Movement, which was great. So the idea of connecting at a conference, like I've already talked about in this episode, there's just something about being in a room full of people who have the same passion that you do, even if it's in different iterations and different sort of niches and specific ways. We all were passionate about getting our message out, about talking to people about podcasting. Anita, I loved her message because she talks about joining Twitter on a whim. And actually, Anita and I we're in a little kind of writers group together on Facebook that started through Twitter. And it's a bunch of people that didn't know each other until we kind of put a call out on Twitter. And it was surprising. You don't ever know what you're going to get back when you throw it out on Twitter. But the group that came together out of this random call was so perfect. So perfect. And it was a really general call. It wasn't like, you need to have this kind of blog, you need to have this many followers, but this really ragtag group of us came together from that. So starting things in a whim can sometimes be a really great thing to say. But I liked how she talked about moving sometimes fast and sometimes slow. I kind of went out of order, but thinking about Misty's comment, I feel the same way when I see another blogger or another podcaster or another writer doing something that I really want to do and I see them achieving that, I do start to feel like it's possible, especially if it's somebody I know. And then Liz, oh my goodness, you've got to head over to her blog. I'll put the link in the show notes, but she and her husband just went on this crazy journey. They quit his job, or they quit their jobs and decided to put their house on the market. They sold all their belongings and drove across the country just on this wandering path. And it was really amazing to watch that. So you can go see that on her blog. But I loved what she said about getting outside of that box that we sometimes put ourselves in, or we surround ourselves with people who are so similar that we don't leave our box. Which kind of segues right into what Jenna had to say, where sometimes the box is a box we create. We make a box for ourselves, like I said, and we put ourselves in it. And so we are our own obstruction. We're the obstacle getting in our own way. So I liked what she said about taking a pause. And I think that's kind of what Liz was talking about as well, that their meandering journey was kind of a pause in their life where they're figuring out, what are we doing now? And looking for clarity in terms of like their jobs. And she's finding clarity in terms of her writing as well. So that was amazing. Thank you guys for calling in. And again, I would love to have more calls from you guys because it's helpful to know what exactly you want, who you are, and just kind of getting a voice to my listeners. So I actually know that you're out there and I know who you are. So I definitely want to have a deeper connection. Again, going back to what I learned at Podcast Movement, which brings me to this podcast and what I want to do with it and what I want it to be. I'm not making any kind of big change because that would be weird since we're, just like 11 or 12 episodes in. But I started thinking about how I can clarify the vision. This is what I wrote down. The Creative Writing Podcast is for burned out, worn out, tapped out, down and out writers and creatives looking for inspiration and practical platform building tools. It's really similar to what I had before as my pitch, which was Creative Writing, the podcast for writers and creatives dealing with the passion and the practice behind making good art. But do you see how it's a little bit more specific? And it sort of speaks to the parts of us that are struggling, the burned out, the worn out, the tapped out, down and out. However you're feeling as a writer or creative, I want this podcast to be inspirational. I want the stories from the people I interview, whether those are writers or publishers or musicians, which we've got coming up next week with the fabulous Mark Martel. I want those stories to inspire. I want them to be the kind of stories that, like Misty said, you hear somebody else doing something, you hear them pursuing their dream and you want to do it too. You feel like it's within your grasp. So that's kind of my goal. But I only like inspiration when it's combined with practical tools, because otherwise you just have a lot of inspiration and then you sit around being inspired and you don't do anything. Maybe that's just me, but I want to have practical tools as well, which is why we're talking to people who work in publishing like Chad Allen from one of the earlier episodes. I still want to do that. I want to talk about practice and method and all of those kinds of things. I'm not going to be talking very much about blogging here because I have another podcast I host, which is Blogger to Business, blogger, and then the number 2, business. So you can find that podcast, which has tons of valuable information and more interviews with people specifically talking about social media, platform building, blog tips, and all that kind of stuff. But over here, I want to talk about things that inspire and also some practical tools, maybe for more writing and publishing and in that kind of vein. And then I will always leave links to the great things that I'm talking about with other brilliant people over at the Blogger to Business podcast, because I think that one is really specific in its niche. And I don't want to be too broad over here either. So this week, I want to end with a question, and I want you to either comment or call me and let me know what you think. So I'm going to say it again, but this is kind of what I'm thinking about turning my new tagline into for this podcast. Creative Writing is a podcast for burned out, worn out, tapped out, down and out writers and creatives looking for inspiration and practical platform building tools. So tell me what you think. If you have any suggestions, if you don't feel like that describes what I'm doing here at all, because I feel like it describes what I'm already doing, but it clarifies just a little bit what my vision is and where I intend to go. Okay, so all that came out of the amazing weekend that was Podcast Movement. And if you want to hear a little bit more about it, I'm talking over at the Blogger to Business podcast, and I have a mini cast episode, which is just a shorter episode than my long interview episode over there. And those come out on Friday, and I'm talking with Taylor Bradford, and you can hear a little bit more about what we learned and how we collaborated and that kind of thing. So I came out of Podcast Movement. I think if I have one thing to say that I took away, it's that I want to go deeper. I want to be more specific to what this podcast is, and I want to go deeper in my connection with you and my connection with the people that I'm interviewing as well. So call me at 929-314-3763. That's 929-31-IF-POD. So I would love to hear from you and hear what you think this podcast is about. Really, you guys help shape what this is to be, because without an audience, I don't really have a podcast. Or there's no purpose behind it because nobody's listening. You guys are so valuable to me, and I'm glad you're here. And that's something that I feel even more strongly about. If you're not subscribed to our email list, please sign up over at creativewriting.com so you can get emails whenever posts are up and episodes are up. And also, I'm almost done with my manifesto on authentic platform building. I'm so excited, and I'm going to be showing that to you guys first. So subscribers, you are going to get a special treat as soon as that's done. Who doesn't want a manifesto? I mean, come on. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Creative Writing. Even though I didn't have any music, feels weird. But by next week, I'm going to have music for you. And I have a great interview with Mark Martel. You should totally go check him out. It's Mark with a C, Martel. And he is a singer, songwriter, musician, just amazing, insane, awesome guy. If you search Mark Martel Queen Extravaganza, you're going to find a ton of amazing videos on YouTube of Mark singing with Queen Extravaganza. We'll talk more about what that is next week, but I hope you go and listen to and watch some of those amazing videos because you're definitely going to want to hear from this guy. Thanks again for listening, and please call me, give me feedback. I want to connect with you. I totally do. Thanks so much, and have an inspired week.